I didn't plan the words before they left my mouth. They slipped out, quiet but steady, as soon as I saw her again. She stood in the doorway of that little coastal cafe, the same one where I used to stop by years ago, the faint sound of the waves rolling just beyond the glass windows. Her eyes widened when she recognized me, a flicker of disbelief breaking through her calm composure. And then, with a voice that carried more weight than she probably intended, she said, "You came back." I should have looked away, should have played it casual. But instead, I let my truth spill in a low, certain reply. I couldn't stay away. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Gentle, not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, thick with things unspoken. She hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. Still graceful, still carrying herself with that quiet strength that had always drawn me in. But there were small changes too, the kind only time leaves behind. Faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the softer shade of her hair, the subtle tiredness in her smile. Somehow, those changes didn't take away from her beauty. They deepened it. I noticed her hand tightening slightly around the strap of her purse, as if grounding herself. She stepped aside, letting me in. The cafe smelled of coffee beans and warm bread, but it was her presence that filled the air. I tried not to stare, but my eyes betrayed me. The way she moved, measured, deliberate, made the simplest gestures captivating. She gestured toward an empty table by the window, the same spot where I used to sit, and my chest tightened with memories I thought I had left behind. As I sat across from her, the glass cool against my back, I found myself studying the light against her face. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, softening her features, tracing her in gold. She caught me looking once, and for a second, her eyes lingered on mine, just long enough for me to feel that familiar pull I thought I'd buried years ago. We didn't speak much at first, just exchanged those short, careful sentences people use when they don't want to admit how much they've missed each other. But under every word was something heavier, something neither of us dared to name yet. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup of coffee the waitress set down, using the heat to steady myself. She, on the other hand, simply folded her hands on the table, her fingers brushing against one another with a subtle nervousness I'd never seen in her before. And in that quiet moment, I realized something I hadn't been ready to face until now. Coming back wasn't an accident. I could tell myself I was just visiting old places, retracing familiar steps. But deep down, I knew the truth. I came back for her. We didn't rush into conversation. Instead, it felt as though we were relearning how to sit in each other's company, as if time had placed a fragile thread between us that neither wanted to snap. The cafe was quieter by the evening. Most of the regulars had left, and the fading light turned the wide windows into soft mirrors that caught her reflection every time she moved. She ordered tea, the same kind she always used to drink, and I chose the house coffee. When the waitress left us alone, the silence hovered again, but this time it was softer, almost comforting. I found myself studying the way her hands cupped the porcelain mug when it arrived, fingers curling around the warmth as though she needed its steadiness. "I wasn't expecting to see you here again," she said finally, her voice measured, steady, but with something beneath it, something that carried both curiosity and a quiet ache. "I wasn't expecting it either," I admitted, giving her a half smile. "But somehow, it feels like I never left." She looked down, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a smile trying to escape before she pressed it away. That tiny flicker stirred something in me. It had been years, but it felt dangerously easy to fall back into noticing the little things about her. The way she avoided eye contact when she was hiding her feelings, how her laugh always began softly, as if testing the air before it could fully leave her lips. The conversation found its rhythm slowly, like walking into the tide and letting it carry us a little farther each time. We talked about small things at first, the cafe, the town, the little changes we noticed around us. But underneath every ordinary sentence was an undertow of something deeper. I listened to her intently, Not just to her words but to the pauses between them, to the way her fingers tapped lightly against the rim of her cup when she grew thoughtful. At one point, I made a light remark, something small about how the cafe still burned the bread just the way I remembered. She laughed, the sound soft but unguarded, her head tipping slightly to the side. For a brief second, it felt like no time had passed at all. The laugh didn't last long, but its echo stayed in me, stirring memories I had tried not to touch. I realized I was leaning forward, elbows resting against the table, drawn closer without meaning to. The space between us felt different now, intimate, as though the world outside had dimmed just to let this moment linger. The candle on the table flickered, its glow catching the lines of her face, softening them, making her look less like someone untouchable and more like someone who had quietly carried 1,000 untold stories. She caught me staring again, and this time she didn't look away right away. Her gaze held mine, steady, curious, a little uncertain. It wasn't a challenge. It was something gentler, as if asking me silently, "Why are you here? Why now?" I didn't have the courage to answer out loud. Not yet. So instead, I let the silence do the speaking, letting her know through my presence alone that being there, across from her, was the only place I wanted to be. The evening stretched on unhurried, as if both of us were hesitant to let it end. Outside, the last of the sunlight gave way to dusky blues, and the street lamps flickered awake one by one. We lingered in our corner by the window, sipping slowly, drawing out every moment as though we could keep the world from intruding. But, of course, the world always finds a way in. The bell over the cafe door rang lightly, and an older woman from town stepped inside. She glanced around before her eyes landed on our table. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something sharper. Curiosity, maybe judgment. She smiled politely, but it lingered too long, too knowingly. I felt the weight of it, and from the way her shoulders stiffened, I knew she felt it too. She dropped her gaze quickly, stirring her tea with a sudden focus that felt forced. Her smile from earlier faltered, and for the first time that night, the warmth in her eyes dimmed. I wanted to reach across the table, to brush my hand against hers, to remind her that we were just two people sharing tea. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Not for her. Not with the years between us. Not with the eyes of others so quick to form their own stories. "People talk too much," she said at last, her voice quiet, almost lost beneath the low hum of the cafe. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the candlelight, watching it flicker and bend. I let a breath out slowly. "Let them," I said. My voice came steadier than I expected. "I didn't come here for them." That made her glance up. Our eyes met across the table, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. I could see the conflict in her, the part of her that wanted to believe me and the part that had learned to be cautious, to protect herself from disappointment. Her hand shifted slightly on the table, her fingers brushing against the edge of her teacup. I watched them, watched how close they came to mine, how deliberate her stillness was. It was a small thing, but it felt like a decision. She wasn't pulling away, but she wasn't reaching out either. "I don't think you understand what this looks like," she murmured, her tone carrying more weariness than sharpness. I leaned forward, my elbows resting against the table, closing the space between us just a little. "Maybe I don't," I admitted, "but I know what it feels like. Sitting here with you, it feels right. That's enough for me." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she studied me, carefully, searchingly, like she was trying to decide whether to trust what she saw. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was filled with the quiet storm of everything neither of us dared to say aloud. And under it all was a tension, unspoken, undeniable, that neither judgmental glances nor whispered gossip could take away. By the time we left the cafe, the streets had quieted. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that had passed earlier in the evening. Puddles shimmered faintly under the glow of the street lamps, and the only sound was the rhythm of our footsteps on the uneven stone path. She walked slightly ahead at first, her arms folded across her chest, her shawl slipping a little off her shoulder. There was something in her posture, guarded but not closed. I fell into step beside her, close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against me, though we didn't touch. The town felt smaller at night, hushed in a way that made it easy to forget the glances and whispers from earlier. Out here, it was just us. The night, the sea in the distance, and the gentle pull of her beside me. She shivered once, subtle, but I caught it. Without thinking, I slipped off my jacket and held it out. "You'll freeze if you don't take this," I said softly. She glanced at me, hesitation flickering across her face, as if taking it might mean more than just warmth. But finally, she accepted, pulling it around her shoulders. The sleeves were too long, swallowing her hands, and the sight made something in my chest tighten. "Thank you," she murmured, almost reluctantly. I shrugged, trying to play it light. "I wouldn't forgive myself if you caught a cold on my watch." That earned me the faintest smile, one she tried to suppress but couldn't. The small curve of her lips stayed with me, lingering long after it faded. We walked on, slower now, our steps falling into a quiet rhythm. Every so often our shoulders brushed, just barely, but each time it happened my pulse quickened. I could feel her awareness of it too, in the way her breath seemed to hitch slightly before she steadied it. "You always had a way of making things feel simple," she said suddenly, her voice carrying softly into the night. "Simple?" I echoed. She nodded, her eyes focused on the path ahead. "Like the world isn't as complicated as I make it out to be." I thought about that for a moment before answering. Maybe it is complicated, but some things, some people are worth keeping simple. She slowed her pace, turning her head just enough to meet my eyes. For a long moment we walked like that, gaze locked, until the uneven path forced her to look away again. But even when she turned forward, the connection lingered, alive in the air between us. The sea breeze picked up, tugging lightly at her hair, and I resisted the urge to tuck the loose strands back for her. Instead, I let the nearness be enough. The quiet rhythm of our steps, the shared jacket, the steady awareness that neither of us wanted the night to end. And though we hadn't spoken the words, I knew. This walk wasn't just a way home. It was a crossing, a step into something neither of us had planned but both of us felt. By the time we returned, the sky had deepened into night. A storm must have been pressing out at sea, because the lights in the cafe flickered as we stepped inside again. Most of the tables were empty now, chairs stacked, the air heavy with the fading warmth of brewed coffee. Only a single candle remained on our table, left glowing faintly as if it had been waiting for us. She sat first, pulling my jacket tighter around her shoulders. I followed, lowering myself into the seat across from her. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The hush of the room was different now, less like silence, more like an invitation. Then the lights went out completely. The cafe slipped into shadow, the soft glow of the candle stretching across her face. The flame caught in her eyes, glinting like unspoken truths she'd kept hidden for far too long. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup though it was already empty. "You shouldn't have come back," she said at last, her voice barely louder than the storm pressing against the windows. The words cut, though I knew she didn't mean them the way they sounded. Her gaze dropped to her hands, and I saw it. The tension in her shoulders, the quiet weight of a woman carrying more than she let anyone else see. "I'm glad I did," I replied quietly. Her lips parted, as if to argue, but instead her breath faltered. For the first time that night, her strength gave way to something raw. "Do you have any idea what this could do to me?" she whispered. "To us? People will think I'm foolish, desperate even. They'll look at me and see someone grasping at something she shouldn't want. Her voice wavered, and she pressed a hand against her temple as if steadying herself. And what if they're right? I didn't move at first. I just let her words hang between us, letting her release what she'd held in so tightly. Then, slowly, I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, closing the distance until the candlelight softened the space between us. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said, my voice steady but low. "I don't care what they say. I don't care how they see us. I just don't want to lose this." I gestured gently between us, the invisible current that neither of us could deny. "I came back because I couldn't stay away, not from you." Her eyes lifted to mine, glistening in the flicker of the candle. For a moment, the mask she wore for the world slipped completely. Vulnerability softened her features, and I saw her not as someone untouchable, but as someone who had quietly longed, just as I had. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the flame. Her fingers stilled, resting gently on the table, open, waiting, almost as if she was daring me to close the space. And though I didn't take her hand just yet, I knew something had shifted. Her walls hadn't fallen, but a door had opened. The candle burned lower, its flame wavering with each draft that slipped through the old cafe windows. Outside, the rain had begun again, soft and steady, tapping against the glass like a metronome, keeping time with the silence between us. She hadn't spoken since her confession, and I hadn't pressed her. Some silences don't need to be broken, they need to be honored. I watched her fingers move restlessly across the wooden tabletop, tracing invisible lines, circling the rim of her cup, pausing only to adjust the jacket I had draped over her shoulders earlier. Every movement spoke louder than words. Finally, I reached across the table, not abruptly, but with the same patience I'd been carrying all evening. My hand found hers, resting gently atop it, stilling her restless motions. Her skin was warm, delicate, yet her fingers tensed at first, instinctively pulling back as if touch itself carried too much meaning. But then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she let her hand remain beneath mine. "You don't have to be afraid with me," I murmured. Her gaze lifted, eyes searching mine with a vulnerability she couldn't hide. For a heartbeat, neither of us breathed. Then she rose quietly from her chair, the candlelight painting her in shifting shades of gold and shadow. I stood too, unsure of what she needed, only knowing I couldn't sit while she trembled with something unspoken. She stepped closer, so close I could feel the faint brush of her breath against my chest. Her hands hovered in the air for a moment, uncertain, before one finally touched my arm, light, tentative, like testing the strength of something fragile. And then, without another word, she leaned forward. Her forehead found its place against my chest, soft and hesitant. My arms rose instinctively, wrapping gently around her, careful not to hold too tightly, as if afraid she might slip away if I did. She exhaled, the sound almost like a sigh of surrender, and in that moment, the weight she carried seemed to ease, just enough for me to feel it leave her shoulders. Her cheek rested against me, warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. I could feel her heartbeat, quick at first, then gradually steadying, finding a rhythm that matched my own. My hand moved slowly across her back, not to pull her closer but to reassure, to remind her that she was safe in this small circle of quiet we'd created. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, though it couldn't have been more than a minute or two. The world outside, the rain, the whispers, the judgments, faded into nothing. There was only her leaning into me, trusting me with the silence, and me silently promising I would hold that trust as carefully as I held her now. When she finally pulled back, it was only far enough to look at me. Her eyes shone in the candlelight, not with tears, but with something deeper. Relief, maybe, or the quiet courage of someone realizing she no longer had to face her fears alone. And though neither of us spoke, the embrace itself had said everything we needed to hear. Morning came gently without fanfare. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the air sharp and clear. I woke earlier than usual, drawn not by restlessness but by a quiet eagerness I couldn't quite explain. She was already in the kitchen when I came down, moving gracefully though her hair was still slightly tousled, the way it gets when sleep has only half let go. The sunlight streaming through the window touched her in a way no candle ever could, soft but honest, illuminating everything she usually tried to hide. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, steam curling upward in delicate spirals. She turned at the sound of my footsteps, and for the briefest moment, I caught it again. That flicker of hesitation in her eyes, like she was reminding herself that I was real, that last night had happened, that she had let herself rest against me without walls between us. "Tea or coffee?" she asked, her voice casual, though there was a gentleness to it now that hadn't been there the night before. "Doesn't matter," I said, "as long as you're the one making it." That earned me a small smile, one that settled onto her lips naturally instead of being forced. It was the kind of smile that told me she hadn't decided anything yet, not really, but that she was allowing herself to be in this moment with me. We sat at the table together, the mugs warm in our hands. The world outside was already waking. The sound of a motorbike passing by, gulls circling near the shore, the faint chatter of neighbors starting their day. But inside, it felt suspended, like time had slowed just enough for us to breathe. Her hand rested near mine on the table, close but not touching. The closeness carried its own weight, heavier than words, more binding than any promise we could speak. I wanted to reach out, to lace my fingers through hers, but I waited. This wasn't about taking, it was about letting her choose. After a long pause, she whispered, "I don't know where this goes." Her eyes stayed fixed on the steam rising from her tea, as though afraid of what she might find if she looked at me directly. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady but soft. "Neither do I, but I know where I'll be." Her eyes lifted then, finally meeting mine. I held her gaze unflinching. "I'm here," I said, "and I'm not leaving again." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was warm, filled with something unspoken but understood. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she slid her hand the last inch across the table until it touched mine, her fingers resting lightly against my skin. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried more weight than anything she could have said. The sunlight caught her profile as she looked out the window, her hand still against mine. And in that simple, quiet moment, I realized something. We didn't need to rush toward answers. What mattered was that she wasn't pulling away anymore. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise wrapped in certainty. But it was enough, it was hope. And sometimes, hope is the beginning of everything.